even exercise can't undo the damage of that poor sleep. So I think it's hard to say, what's the first, second, third order term here in a specific case, but in general, I would say that very good sleep, very good nutrition, very good exercise are going to do more for people in most regards than, say, the mainstream approach, which would be pharmacotherapy.
This episode is also brought to you by my friends at Plunge. Some of you know that when I met Wim Hof, the Iceman, he was instrumental in helping me cure my chronic migraines with cold therapy. I first discovered cold plunging on my journey to better health about 3 years ago. I was getting pretty serious migraine headaches from a combination of poor sleep habits, inflammatory foods, work-related stress, and dehydration. I had no idea what was going on. I was miserable, couldn't function at work or home, and none of my doctors could figure out how to solve my problem without addictive pain meds. I started slowly with cold showers and immediately felt the benefits. I knew I needed to take it to the next level and started cold plunging. I focused on optimizing my sleep, fitness, nutrition, and it all started coming together. I have probably saved over $20,000 in medical bills staying healthy and fit on this protocol. How much would you invest to feel amazing? For me, the investment in a cold plunge to feel like me again was priceless. I've lost weight, I'm more mentally awake and don't need coffee or Red Bulls, and I'm doing my best to live a longer, healthier life to be with my family. That's what I want. Cold and heat therapy is an integral part of my regular training protocols now. My friends at Plunge just released the all-new All-In unit, which is totally redesigned and full of upgrades. Use my code BRY, that's B-R-Y, to get a better price when you buy it. Just go to plunge.com and check out the all-new All-In, as well as their beautiful hot sauna units available now for pre-order. It's been one of the best investments I've made in my health. I guarantee it. This episode is brought to you by WeWork. Don't just work from anywhere. Your working week deserves a little luxury. Like beautiful spaces to spark ideas in person, designed carefully for collaboration, and peaceful nooks with focus mode and awesome Wi-Fi. I love WeWork because I'm surrounded by like-minded people. It's a great place to hang out, network, or make good friends. They're even dog-friendly. Whether you're a solo entrepreneur or you bring your entire team, yes, your entire team, check out WeWork. Because now you can unlock productive, flexible workspaces in over 180 locations near you, especially if you use the WeWork All Access Basic. Get 30% off your first 5 months by using code Brian, AA30, that's B-R-Y-A-N, AA30, or to redeem the offer, just go to we.co/behind the brand. All right, here we go.
This is Peter Attia, and you're on Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Everyone, welcome to another episode of the show. Dr. Peter Attia, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
You bet. I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job?
Depends which job. I have too many.
Well, we're talking about the new book. I'm thrilled to be reading it. I'm not all the way done, of course. It's I'm taking my time, but it's a timely book for me. But let's roll it back in the chronology a little bit, and for people who don't know you, let's bring them up to speed. Talk about your background, talk about what you're doing, talk about the lead up to this book, and break it down for us.
Well, let's see. This is a book that I started working on about 7 years ago, and it's a book that I rewrote a couple of times in the way to finally publishing it, and yeah, I don't know what else to say about it other than I guess it's a book I started writing, frankly, before I had a podcast. And once I started podcasting, there was a part of me that thought, boy, is there any value in writing this book? Because I can communicate these same ideas through a podcast. And it's certainly much easier to do so through a podcast. But as the book kind of came together, I felt I felt really grateful that I was working on it. And I think that a book forces you to do something that's very difficult to do in any other medium, including blogging, which I've been doing for a long period of time, which is it really forces you to sharpen your thinking for everything in one place. And I guess if the listener hasn't figured it out yet, we should probably clarify what the book's about. The book is about longevity, which is sort of a half-baked term that I think doesn't mean much. But hopefully I wanted to provide a serious book on the topic that wasn't full of kind of empty half promises and sort of snake oil.
Well, it means a lot to me. It's a very personal book to me because longevity, for people who have been listening to this podcast on my side, know about my personal journey, how I've not had very good luck with modern medicine, at least, and doctors, although I'm really grateful to doctors who can treat acute injuries. And, if I get my arm bit off by a shark, that can be treated. If I have a major heart attack, that's good. But everything else that I've been struggling with for the last decade, as I'm now, this over 40 demographic, has been very frustrating. So I'm very interested in your book for personal reasons. It's super relevant and it has been top of mind for me. I'm curious. I have an idea, but I'd like to hear from you. Why did you rewrite it? And how many times have you rewritten it since, in that 7-year period?
The book you're reading and the book everyone would read is the third completely distinct version of the book. And even that version is, as all books, I think, go through this, it's about 2/3 the length of the submitted manuscript. So it's not a short book. It's about a 500-page book.
Yeah.
And it was a third longer than that before we sort of really chiseled it down into what it is today. But again, there were two versions prior. And, I think the first version was really very technical, very much without a story or a narrative arc at all. And I think very, very rightly so, was rejected by anyone who read it as a textbook. I actually really liked it, but I'm really grateful to all the people that didn't mince their words and feedback in saying it was absolutely horrible. The second version was better, but honestly, it just it didn't tie together. And truthfully, there were elements of the second version that made it into the third version. There were no elements of the first version that did.
Yeah, I was just thinking, maybe my mind was wandering a little bit about this idea of how quickly science changes or technology changes. So 7 years is quite a long time, and a lot has happened in the last 5 to 7 years that I can think about. And so I wondered if some of those things were updated or refined, and if so, what were they?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of things in science that have changed, but it's also amazing how many things haven't changed. And I'm not sure what amounted to greater edits, because you could really put them into three categories. There are things where, the science has changed itself. There are areas where the data are largely the same, but my interpretation of them has changed. And then there are areas where neither of those are correct. Mm-hmm. And I would say the most interesting of the three has been the middle bucket. It's been the areas where, when I started writing the book, I sort of felt one way about the information, about the data, and my own evolution has changed and has refined. And I think that's actually pretty good news, because I think, if every year you had to rewrite a book like this because of the pace of scientific development, it would be hard to keep up. But I think the good news is that's not actually happening. And I think that there's a lot of noise out there, but the true substance of it, which, again, it comes down to things like exercise and understanding how to do it and what the benefits are, what the magnitude of it is. That's not stuff that's getting turned over.
Yeah, that is good news. And good. I hope that this interview will cut through the clutter. Maybe let's start by, if you could help me define the difference between emotional health and mental health.
Well, I think they could be one and the same. I mean, I sort of use them a little bit differently, but I think maybe some might say the real distinction is between mental illness and mental health. But again, if we just put the sort of the semantics exactly aside, what I'm really trying to distinguish is emotional health or mental health is something that concerns everyone, including people who might not have a diagnosis of a mental illness. So there's a medicalized part of this that is codified in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Illnesses. And someone listening to this might say, well, but I don't, there's nothing that about me that lines up in that manual, so why should I care about this? And what I would argue is, no, you ought to care about your emotional health, or maybe mental health, depending on the word, as much as you care about your physical health. And it matters just as much to the quality of your life.
Yeah, this became clear, and it seems so intuitive, but it wasn't to me for so long. And this is one thing that really, about a decade ago, the light bulb really clicked. And that is, there's this interdependence, or there's this correlation between physical health and emotional health.
What was the light bulb moment for you?
That they go together. That when I'm taking care of my body, my physical health, I'm exercising, I'm doing strength training, weights, whatnot. I seem to have a better positive mental outlook. I feel better. I am more resilient to take on the stress of the day, or the difficult, when you unexpectedly get punched in the mouth, metaphorically or physically, you're ready for it. You're more resilient. You're more ready, rather than before. I was maybe not taking care of myself as much, and then the stress would come, or something really bad would happen, and I wouldn't deal with it as well. And so I just recognized this relationship. And I also talked to a couple of pro athletes. I think it was Russell Wilson, who when I sat down with Russ, he said, I have a physical trainer, he helps me lift and shows me form. Why wouldn't you also have a mental fitness trainer? It makes sense to have someone helping you with mental fitness or emotional fitness. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's totally right. It's not just therapy, like if sort of your mental health side of things, but really the emotional health, I just found goes hand in hand with the physical side. So then, break down what metabolic health is.
Metabolic health really speaks to, I think at its simplest level, what our body does with fuel. So we eat food, of course, for energy, and food is energy in the form of chemical energy. It's chemical bonds. So everything you eat is organic, and therefore it's made up of a bunch of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, all of these things. And it's the bonds between those things that contain energy. Now, our body has to figure out a way to take those bonds apart and get the electrical energy that's contained within those chemical bonds and make something called ATP out of it, which I'm sure people have heard of. So the whole process of metabolism is, how do you take that chemical energy, turn it into electrical energy, and then back into chemical energy to be used again? That's what we are really, really good at. All living organisms do this thing. Your metabolic health speaks to how well you do that. And it seems that the less well you do that thing, the more sick you get, full stop. And that means the more you're going to get heart disease, the more you're going to get cancer, the more you're going to get Alzheimer's disease, the more you're going to get other forms of dementia. You're obviously going to get type 2 diabetes, which is a very extreme version of what happens when you aren't metabolically healthy. So in its simplest sense, it is when the body stops being efficient at storing energy and at recouping that energy that it stores.
Okay. And so we talk a lot about metabolism, and maybe you can debunk some of these myths. So as I'm getting older, I feel like, and I'm sort of just floating with the narrative here, my metabolism is slowing down. Is that a true or false statement?
It's an interesting statement. I don't think your metabolic rate is slowing down as much as you or I think it is. And by the way, I feel the same way. But I do think we partition fuel less efficiently as we age. So as we age, we experience significant changes in hormones. So for example, as testosterone levels go down, as estrogen levels go down, we are more likely to store excess energy in the form of fat. Mm-hmm. And that's why giving testosterone to men, giving estrogen to women will improve body composition, even independent of energy intake. There are also enzymatic changes, not to get too bogged down in the sort of biochemistry of it, but there's, for example, an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase that determines what your body does with the storage form of fat called triglycerides. And the more lipoprotein lipase you have on muscle cells, the more likely you are to use the storage form of fat to be liberated for energy use. Conversely, the more lipoprotein lipase you have on fat cells, the more likely you are to store these triglycerides in the form of fat. Well, guess what happens as you age? You end up having less lipoprotein lipase on muscles and more of it on fat cells. So it really becomes just kind of a question of fuel partitioning that is diminishing. But I think it's an oversimplification to say our metabolism slows as we age.
Yeah. So just before we got on camera here, I saw you consume a meat stick, which I would assume is like pure protein. I would assume that you're about middle age. What does your routine look like now in terms of consuming food? What portion of that is protein? Have you done intermittent fasting? I know that you've been a big faster in the past, but talk to us about how it is today. Now, how do you look at fuel and food consumption and the timing of all that?
Again, my life today is not fully optimized around my perfection and performance. It's really kind of optimized around family, work, and things like that. So, my day starts around 5:30 when my kids are up, and it's, in the morning, it's about getting the dog out and having a coffee with my wife and getting my daughter off to school. I mean, we have to leave at 6:30 in the morning, getting back, getting the boys out the door. I mean, it's just sort of a gong show. And truthfully, there isn't really any time to eat, even if I wanted to.
Yeah. So you live like the rest of us. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's not, I think there's this assumption that like every minute of my life revolves around, optimized health or something like that.
Yeah. I imagined you waking up with one of those like VO2 max masks on, and you're already like on the treadmill and you're taking calls and answering emails. But that's not the case.
Categorically not, right? Okay. So my first, the first thing I'm eating outside of a coffee is probably post morning workout, when I'm gonna have typically like venison sticks, or maybe a protein shake or something like that, and then I kind of need to have an opportunistic meal in the middle of the day. Opportunistic meaning like sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on how my calls are going and how they're scheduled. And
yeah,
if I'm really lucky, my wife or my assistant will grab me a salad with a little extra chicken or steak or something to throw on it for some protein. And then I usually have a pretty early dinner, actually. Again, just because of kids and stuff like that. So usually I'm done eating by about 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to, really not eat after dinner. I really like to have 3 good hours of not eating before bed. It really enhances sleep for me.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the way I'm doing it. But again, you can tell there's not an abundance of planning that goes into it. If I'm keeping track of anything throughout the day, I'm sort of keeping track of how much protein I'm getting.
Yeah, I was going to
Um,
ask, what are you counting macros and like how much protein are you consuming a day?
yeah, I'm probably between about 140 and 180 grams per day of protein.
Yeah. I mean, that seems about right based on simple math. What's your weight?
About 190.
Okay. Yeah. So that seems to be like what everyone's talking about is like the right amount of protein. How are you dealing with inflammation? I've found that as I'm aging, inflammation is becoming more of a problem, and I'm identifying it through certain foods. So, for example, I've eliminated basically dairy from my diet. I don't eat much bread, if any. Once in a while, I'll have some real sourdough, that's just basically a little flour, water, and whatever else is in sourdough. But how are you dealing with inflammation?
I mean, I'm pretty fortunate in that there doesn't seem to be anything in food that is measurably impacting inflammation. Again, we can measure inflammation through blood tests. So you can look at something like a C-reactive protein that is a very, very sensitive yet very non-specific marker of inflammation. There are other markers of these as well. Fortunately, mine tend to be as close to unmeasurable as possible, regardless of what I'm eating. I know that's not true for many people. So I know that there are undoubtedly lots of food sensitivities that don't rise to the level of being actual allergies. But nevertheless, where you see low levels of simmering inflammation in people, and dairy and wheat are probably two of the most notable culprits. And when you remove those things, lo and behold, that inflammation gets better. So I guess, knock on wood, I feel pretty lucky. I don't seem to have appreciated a change in at least measurable inflammation as I age. Now, what I think some people might perceive as inflammation, but I don't know that it necessarily is I feel older. I mean, I definitely ache a little bit more. When I get up in the morning, I don't feel like I did when I was 30.
Right.
How much of that is inflammation versus, just wear and tear on tissue, is sort of another issue. But I definitely have to pay more attention to my body now than I did even 10 years ago. It was very different at 40. My capacity to work is not what it once was. My capacity to stack very difficult workouts on successive days is not what it once was. And therefore, I just, I spend much more time listening to my body today. And if it says, hey, you really, really pushed hard on Monday, Tuesday we pushed a little bit hard, I think Wednesday needs to be an easier day, the answer is great. It's an easier day.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. I'm at that point too. Everything's changing, um, and I've been pretty diligent now about uh, blood labs and lab tests, blood tests, all that stuff to figure out where I'm at. But it's it's a little bit disheartening when you wake up and you kind of feel like you got hit by a truck and you didn't do anything. You just like it's all different. And I don't really know whether to listen to my body sometimes or to push through. So that's where I don't know. It's uh, like
I think there's a happy medium. So I'll give you
yeah.
my advice on this, Brian. So I think there's nothing worse than inactivity, right?
Yes.
So yesterday I flew.
Okay.
So I spent, I went away for the weekend to visit my parents. So that means I'm sleeping on a bed that's not my bed. Everything is uncomfortable. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sleeping. I'm not in my routine. I'm not eating my food. I'm not doing my thing. The flight out of, from Toronto back to Austin is, it's not that it's a long flight, but it's a long travel day in the airport. And to make a long story short, I land, it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. By the time I get home, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I've done nothing all day but travel. So I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. It's now 2 in the afternoon, and I've done nothing. And
Yeah.
normally Sunday for me is a crushing day of workouts. It's a 3 workout day normally. It's my
Okay.
biggest day of the week. Now I get home and my appetite to do anything is zero. I just don't want to do a thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and
It's nice to hear that you are human. Okay, so it's very relatable. Okay, this could be
right.
any of our stories. Yeah.
And I decide that there's a happy medium somewhere between crushing the workout and doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, all right, I'm going to go get on the bike for 40 minutes on the trainer. This should have been an hour, but it's going to be 40. But I'm not going to push it as hard. I'm going to listen to my body. And I end up probably going to about 10 beats per minute lower than where I would have gone. I get off the bike and I'm supposed to go off and do another workout, but I'm like, nope, let's everybody jump in the pool and we're just going to goof off and play in the pool. So then we just jump in the pool and goof off and play in the pool. And now I'm supposed to go in the gym and do another workout. And this is about a 90-minute workout that's really, really hard. It's probably the hardest workout I'll do in the week. And I say, you know what? I'm not going to do it, but I am going to go in the gym for 35 minutes and just do a circuit that is not going to clobber me, but it's something me and my wife will do together. So me, my wife, and all the kids are in the gym doing a big circuit out. It ends up taking about 45 minutes. And that was the day.
Yeah.
So it's better than having done nothing. And by the way, my body felt better for having done that, but I didn't set myself up for damage by forcing myself. And that's something I would have done a few years ago. A few years ago, I would have forced that workout no matter what. And it would have come at the expense of time with my family. And it also would have come at the expense of, I think, my own long-term health. So again, that's just one extreme example. But I would say on those days when you are so feeling beat up, go for a very long walk.
Yeah.
Inactivity is the worst thing that we can do, regardless of how we feel. So a recovery walk is better than a recovery, lay on the couch.
Yeah. I love that message. I think it's very doable. Yeah. So it is just listening to your body, your heart, and getting to know yourself. Let's dig more into mobility. How important is mobility to longevity?
Well, it's very important, but again, it's a very complicated topic. It's sort of like balance. Like, does balance matter? Well, of course, balance matters. And look at what happens when we age and our balance deteriorates. The question and what makes it difficult is understanding what the root drivers are. What is at the root of mobility? What is at the root of flexibility? What is at the root of balance? What is at the root neurologically? What is at the root from a structural standpoint, from a proprioceptive standpoint? And the real question is, how do we train those elements? And I think that's some of the most difficult part of exercise, because most things in exercise you can tune out, right? If you're riding a stationary bike or outside for a run or doing whatever you want, like, you can be listening to music, listening to podcasts. And by the way, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, right? That's sometimes a wonderful reprieve. But when you are doing a lot of this sort of movement training, it requires immense concentration. And every day I try to do something, even if it's only for 10 minutes, that focuses very much on that. Today, the exercises that I worked on were foot exercises. So, basically working on ways that I can potentiate force through different parts of my foot. These are very complicated exercises for me. My feet are far from perfect. And as I look to undo many years of incorrect movement patterns, I have to be able to work on these things, which again, in the moment seem and look very silly. They're isometric exercises of foot tension. But if your feet aren't working, nothing's going to work upstream of them.
Yeah. I know you're a big fan of like box jumps and step ups and whatnot. Again, it seems obvious, but why are you going to such great lengths to work on this flexibility or mobility of your feet when, most of us are working on our physique, how we look? It seems, I don't know, almost like too hyper focused on such a small little area. But your point is if your balance is not in check, or if you're playing a sport, help me understand the importance of the intricacies.
I mean, again, I think it's just there's nothing wrong with being obsessed with your physique or, doing bicep curls and push-ups and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's purely a function of what are you optimizing for?
Yeah.
And, I'm only optimizing for one thing, which is the last decade of my life, the marginal decade.
Yes.
And I'm getting a lot of tangential and peripheral benefits today. It's not like I'm debilitated today because I'm focusing on being a really healthy 85-year-old. I mean, I can still do more than most 50-year-olds, I'm sure. But my focus is very deliberate, right? Because I understand what the failure points are when people are in their 80s. People don't fail in their 80s because their biceps aren't strong enough. People fail in their 80s because they don't have eccentric strength in their quads. They don't have mobility in their feet. They don't have reactivity. They've lost type 2 muscle fibers. They have no power. This is why people fall and break their hips. And so everything I'm doing is really working on the maximum return with the minimum risk, i.e., the maximum amount of those things with the lowest risk of injury today. And, the good news is, again, that I think gives me probably 80% of what a person would achieve if they were solely focused on being the best version of themselves today.
Yeah, I think the book is, you flipped the script, at least on how we look, or how most people look at longevity. You're trying to avoid, it seems, the big ticket items. And it's striking that you're starting now, let's, say midlife, on this, what you're calling the marginal decade, or basically the last decade of your life, whether that's 80 or 90, however long we get to live on this planet. But you're starting now. And you're saying now is the time to prepare for that last decade, not when you're in the decade, because then it's too late.
Yeah. Again, I use an analogy of a glider, right? So, gliders are generally just going to go down. And once the glider hits the treetops, it's kind of over. So the time to work on how high you get towed is not when you're about to hit the treetops.
Right.
It's long before that. And so, at 50, it's very important to me in this next decade that I gain as much altitude as possible physiologically. We call that physiologic headroom. And there is an absolute inevitability of decline, and it's quite nonlinear. So it's going to be, somewhat linear till about 75, and then it becomes, again, very nonlinear. The decline goes very steep after 75. And, I can't tell you how many times I've both watched this personally in people I know, but also the literature is completely unambiguous about this. And so, yeah, I look, it's never too late to start doing something. I've also seen people who have never done a thing until they're in their mid 70s, and then they decide to do something. And that's always a better outcome than doing nothing. But if you have any room in front of you, before the age of 75. Yeah, I think it's never too soon to start.
And so let's talk about order of operations. I've heard you talk about how you thought one way about nutrition. Now you think a different way in terms of the order of ops. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I guess you're referring to kind of like the significance of each of the modifiable behaviors and how I think about that. Yeah, I would say that I do think that for virtually every human being out there, the biggest opportunity to both lengthen life and improve quality of life, at least physically, comes through exercise. Now, again, you have to be deliberate and you have to know what you're doing, because, just doing, mindless exercise won't necessarily close the gap. And exercise is a very broad term. And of course, what we're referring to here is much more nuanced. That's why exercise actually gets more chapters in the book than any other topic. I think there are 3 chapters on exercise because it is such an important topic. But, there's really no upper limit to the benefits that accrue through strength and fitness. Whereas there really are diminishing returns with nutrition. I mean, at some point, if you're in energy balance, getting adequate amounts of protein and micronutrients and things of that nature, going down the rabbit hole further and further on your nutrition is only bringing marginal gains and may bring no gains whatsoever.
Right.
And,
I can't eat more vegetables.
Yeah. At some point the first order thing matters, right? Which is, are you overnourished or undernourished or adequately nourished? I mean, that becomes the most important driver, and how you get there is way less important than are you able to sustain it? That everybody gets so fixated on what's the best diet. And I think the literature is just so abundantly clear on this. The best diet is whichever one you can adhere to stay in energy balance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will co-sign that. That's been my experience too. Okay, so if exercise is number 1, is nutrition number 2? What's number 3, 4, 5? Sleep's
I don't even. Yeah, it would be hard to say like what's the rank order of them. It really does depend on the individual. I mean, look, for somebody, sleep might be number 1, right? If a person is sleeping 4 hours a night, and they've got sleep apnea, and they've got even medical conditions like restless leg syndrome or things like that are untreated, then even exercise can't undo the damage of that poor sleep. So I think it's hard to say, what's the first, second, third order term here in a specific case. But in general, I would say that very good sleep, very good nutrition, very good exercise are going to do more for people in most regards than, say, the mainstream approach, which would be pharmacotherapy. And again, there's nothing wrong with pharmacotherapy. And there are certain problems that absolutely require pharmacotherapy, where, all of the nutrition, exercise, sleep in the world won't address them. But that holy trio is going to get you a lot done. And by the way, if those 3 things are failing, no amount of drugs, hormones, and supplements in the world are ever going to fix the problem.
Yeah, and that going back to my original story, which is I had no idea how interconnected the emotional health and physical health was. This was my experience. I was just focused on the eating part and not focused on exercise, and it wasn't doing much. And it wasn't until I really got serious about the physical part, moving my body, focusing on strength, mobility, just exercise in general, in combination with nutrition. That's when I actually figured out that I had a sleep problem. And I'm pretty fit, but it turns out as you age, I was having some sleep apnea, mild sleep apnea issues, just because my jaw was resting in a certain position and my tongue was falling back in my mouth and causing me to wake up 20 to 30 times at night. And I was just feeling wrecked when I woke up. but I had no idea, right? It was only because I finally went in to talk to several doctors to try and figure out what was happening, and actually the doctors couldn't solve it for me. What happened was the pulmonary specialist said, "Oh, you should wear a CPAP machine." I said, "What's that?" And it ended up being this starfish, shaped the thing that went on my face and pumped oxygen. I had it for like 2 weeks, and I thought, there's no way this is not going to scale. I'm not wearing this till I'm 90. I've got to figure out something else. I just did a little research on my own and figured out that if I lost a little bit more weight, that might do the trick. And sure enough, I dropped about 10 pounds, and the apnea went away. And so it was that combination of, taking care of my body through exercise, eating properly, and then the sleep kind of fell into place. And then what a miracle. I started feeling like $1,000,000. Like everything turned around for me. And that's when I really started to sort of dial down then into the science of it, getting more serious about my labs and understanding my hormone levels. Anyway, so I'm co-signing everything that I'm reading so far in the book. I'm loving it. I hope it's a roadmap for other people who are like me. A couple of the other things I wanted to talk about were, what should we be tracking? The metrics. What should we be looking at when we do our blood panels? What are some of these big ticket items? Whether it's cholesterol or testosterone or triglycerides, or what are some of these markers that people should go into their doctors and requesting?
Well, there are many. I think that it would be hard for me to kind of give just a top five. There are, a couple that stand out that you only need to measure once, but everybody I think should know them. I think everybody should know their ApoE genotype. That's a gene that says a lot about your risk of cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. And again, it's not a gene that's deterministic. So it's not like learning this locks you into a fate. But for some people, it can be the real motivation they need to take prevention seriously. There's also a really unique lipoprotein called Lp(a) that is shockingly prevalent. So somewhere between 8 and 12% of the population walking around have an elevated level of this, and it's the number one hereditary driver of cardiovascular disease. A lot of times you hear about these otherwise healthy people having heart attacks in their 40s or 50s. Very often it's attributed to this. So that's unfortunately something most doctors don't look for. So I really suggest that everybody ask for that test. The most important lipid I think to be looking for is ApoB, and in the book I explain in great detail why that's the case. But it would be hard to say there's even a top five. It is it's a pretty exhaustive list of things in there.
How often should we be getting our blood checked?
I think it depends on how often you're doing something to perturb the system. So for some people that might mean once a year. For some people that might mean 4 times a year. If you're changing something, then I think it makes sense to try to measure it. But if you're kind of on autopilot, it might be that just an annual comprehensive blood test is sufficient.
How about VO2 max? Talk about that a little bit.
Do the listeners know what it means, or should I explain what it means?
Yeah, break it down. And I wouldn't even know where to go get something like that tested. So talk about what it is, why it's important, what it measures, and then how do we go find a place so we can see where we're at?
Well, maybe even before I say all that, I should just point out why we're talking about it. There's no metric of a person's health. There's nothing you can measure about a person that is a stronger predictor of how long they will live than their VO2 max. So hopefully that provides some motivation for people to pay attention as we talk about this. So VO2 max is the maximum ventilation rate of oxygen. That's the technical term for it. And that is measured under basically only two conditions, either when you're on a stationary bike or on a treadmill, and you have a very elaborate face mask, strapped to your face that is measuring the amount of oxygen you consume as you are pushed to a maximal effort. So this is a very difficult test. It takes about 20 minutes. And that includes kind of a warm up and ramp up until you are pushed to a maximal effort. And somewhere close to that very maximal effort, the sensor, the oxygen sensor in the device, will be able to detect the maximum amount of oxygen you've consumed in liters per minute. That's normalized to your body weight. And ultimately, this is a number that's reported in milliliters per kilogram per minute. Where you can get this done is basically anywhere. If you live in a reasonably sized city, you can search anywhere and get this done. Here in Austin, we send patients to a lab at the University of Texas, and it's about $100 test. So the biggest cost is the pain of the test, not the dollars you're going to pay for it.
Okay.
And that number basically is the single best predictor of your cardiorespiratory fitness, and then by extension, how long you live. So we really like to see our patients have that number be very high for their age and for their sex.
This series is called Behind the Brand. We talk about brands. People are brands. People are people, but also, we have a personal brand. What would you say is the Dr. Peter Attia brand?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'd be curious what others would say. It's yeah, I'm not really sure what my brand is.
It seems like you follow a very non-conventional path, and that also seems very deliberate. So why have you chosen that non-conventional path? Do you agree with that? Like, you're off the beaten path a bit?
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's part of your brand. I think that's, it seems like it's a deliberate choice. And so why have you decided, or why do you think?
I don't know. I think that's a consequence of something else. I don't know that that's actually deliberate. I think it just, if everybody else saw medicine the way I did now, I don't think I would be compelled to come up with something different just to be different. I suppose anybody who has a sort of different point of view would say that, but yeah, I don't know that I feel the need to be different about it. I feel the need to be nuanced about something. I suppose that might be more the case. Yeah, so that might be it. That's not a very interesting brand, the brand of nuance.
Well, I find it fascinating because, again, it was my experience. I did not have good luck or very good taste with my visits to every conventional doctor on the planet. I went, when I started having some health issues, I had headaches, and first thing I did is went to see a neurologist, and he immediately said, "Oh, this is easily solved. I know what's wrong with you. You have migraines, and here's some pills." And so, oh, okay, is that the answer? Okay, so then I was still having headaches after that, so I went to see the cardiologist, and he said, "Oh, I know what's wrong. You have your red blood cell count is a little bit too high. Your BP is a little high. Take statins." And so, with each visit to each doctor, it was a very myopic view of my condition. And of course, their specialty, they tried to diagnose and treat it, but none of them could really figure out my problem. It turns out, after all these doctor visits and all this money spent, I started trying to figure out what was happening to me personally. Took responsibility for my own health, and listening to people like you who are sort of off the traditional path. And I found that it was largely electrolytes, that I was dehydrated, that I was drinking plenty of water, but I was missing a certain, potassium, magnesium, and sodium. And that largely solved my headache issue. Of course, I had other issues like the apnea that was happening. And I think part of just being fatigued was also lending my headaches. But none of the doctors could figure that out. I had to figure that out on my own or piece it together. And so I'm really grateful for you and for people like you who are thinking differently or nuanced about health, longevity, all these things that we're all interested in figuring out how to do it. And so, I would say, I'm really grateful for that brand of thinking, that it's different and it's, I don't know, it's changed my life. So it's hard for me to put into words how meaningful, how much the impact is, but yeah, it means a lot.
I'm happy to hear that. Happy to be a small part of it.
Yeah. We're about out of time here. I think I've got enough to work on. I can piece this together in the edit. I'm going to finish the book, and then I'll have my full write up and capability here. Is there anything else that we didn't cover? Maybe you want to leave some final parting words to those who are on this path of longevity, words of advice or wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say that it's really easy to sort of ignore this problem in the here and now, and therein lies, I think, the challenge of anything that, whether it be saving for retirement or studying for a quiz as opposed to going out to a party when you're in college. I mean, any of these things where there's some amount of delayed, gratification involved. I think none probably are more relevant than this one, because I don't think I've ever met a person who near the end of their life didn't wish that they had more health, right? It's not so much the years in the life, but the health in those years. We all accept that we're going to die, and I don't think there's anything in this book that I talk about that suggests otherwise, or even suggests that there's some path to enormous life extension. What we're really talking about here is, how do you maximize the quality of life in those years? And very small amounts of consistent, deliberate effort before you feel you need it will pay off so much at the end. And I hope that this book can help people see that, internalize that, and put it into action.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. It's all about the journey. Ain't nothing changed but the weather.